Hi, my name is Philip Bither. I'm the curator for performing arts here at the Walker Arts Center. And with me today, we have the three co-creators of Aging Magician, a new music theater work which will premiere in 2 nights here in the McGuire Theater at the Walker. To my left is singer-performance artist Rinde Eckert, writer, director. He's done many things, but in this instance, he's the writer of the work and the lead performer. Paola Prestini, the composer and one of the originators, and in many ways kind of driving forces around this work getting ultimately realized, is with us. To Rinde's left, and to Paola's left is Julian Crouch, who is a long-standing friend of the Walker, has been here with a number of projects in the last 10 years, and is directing the work and is also a co-conceiver of the entire concept of it. So you guys, it's great to have you here.
Thank
You're
you.
just a few days away from the world premiere. I'd like to start with, how did this work, what were the original seeds of the Aging Magician, and where did it come from, its origins?
I'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I like to think of the way this came to life in 2 ways. One is a dream to work with these very specific artists, and our 4th collaborator is not here. His name's Mark Stewart.
Mark Stewart.
And he co-conceived the instrument design, which is the set with Julian and Amy. But it really started with a dream to work with these very specific artists. I had seen them each. Your dream. Yeah, yeah.
And your work has been known for its collaborative,
yes,
multi-platform way.
Yes, I've always been very, very in love with multimedia, mostly for the fact that as a composer I could learn through, you know, the worlds and the skills of different artists.
Did you know Rinde and
So I had
Julian?
seen Rinde perform and God Created Great Wales 20 years ago. And I was painting the theater where he was performing, and I went every single night. I was obsessed. And then I had seen Julian's work in Satyagraha, which he co-directed and which was, you know, designed
and you both have
at the
this
Met.
connection with Philip Glass.
Yes, and then Mark Stewart I had been with in Italy in a residency program where he had created these beautiful, unique instruments that only one could hear. So they were stethoscopes that, you know, you put and you can jam out, but they're called personal instruments, and I fell in love with him. So fast forward, I had wanted to do this piece that was based on a short novel by Jonathan Safran Foer that dealt with reimagining the crossing of the river Styx, the original Carontel, through Venice and through a magician, and asked Rinde to be part of it and Mark to design something. And very luckily, Julian was in the audience that night because he knew Mark and had kind of helped Mark with the very original conception of this instrument just by chance.
Which audience? What was that?
We had done it in as part of.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was at the kitchen.
Oh, so you did kind of a showing of an early stage?
Like a 10-minute showing 5 years ago with Beth Morrison, who I co-produced the work with, and Julian was in the audience, and I'll let you.
I was. I mean, my connection with this was very strange. Like Mark Stewart, I knew before I lived in Brooklyn, and when I moved to Brooklyn, it just happened he was around the corner. You know, I literally went around past his house one day, and he said, "Come in, I'm making this big head out of bicycle parts and guitars and bits of." And I came in actually with my friend Rob Thurple, who
Rob, yeah,
you know, part of Punch, and I went in and he took me up to his room and showed me, and he said, "Look, I got this head." He said, "But I don't know how to put it up." And I said, "Well, I put it up on a ladder," and that was it. And I walked away and left. I thought that could have been my only contribution. But then I think I met you through Mark. You came around the house sometimes, and so I went to see the show. I didn't like it that much, to be honest. I thought it was. To be fair, it wasn't really their fault. It was just number 10 of 10 pieces.
Yeah, I wasn't the writer of this, by the way.
Right. No.
And it was
Were you performing?
I was performing.
This?
The audience were tired and they wanted to go to the toilet by that time. You know,
it was
very
there were 10 different pieces.
Very long evening, and a lot of them were very ambitious. And but obviously, you know, I liked it enough to stay interested. And then I think. I actually can't quite remember the next stage, whether you rewrote something or whether we talked first.
I think we talked first, and then we decided that we would have the Brooklyn Youth Chorus involved, and that they would be, you know, that the kids would actually be the guides. And then I asked Rinde would he write the story, and then he said yes, and then slowly got Julian involved, and then we were on our way.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the writing process. I remember I just moved to Brooklyn, and I was very familiar with the F line. In fact, I visited before, always seemed to be on the F line, and I think because I knew they were sort of doing this journey to death in some ways, and I remember thinking, well, what if it's something more recognizable? And then maybe it's not that recognizable in Minneapolis, but in New York, the F line and the stops on the F line, and the fact that Coney Island's at the end of the F line just seemed like a interesting heaven journey, for someone. And I think, and at my time, the choir came in. Yeah. But it's funny, it is a backward process almost, because at a very early stage, because even at here, I'd banged together a very rough design idea, sort of before the writing away, and had those little hands. Because I knew they had this beautiful head, kind of like Rinde, this machine. And I thought, well, if it's a magician, he should have a couple of hands, and that'll make it clear. And it's funny, that came in last week. We've gone 5 years without that. But
the construction of the huge head and the metal.
Well, the head we've been with us. The head we've been touring with the head, but the hands and everything else, and these incredible. I know them as Whirly Cop. What do you call them now?
Vela Voce.
Vela Voce, which is a much fancier name for
or velophones.
Or velophones,
I think.
Yeah.
So
these are the constructed, invented instruments.
Yes.
So we kind of
two of
designed
the
it before we
constructed
wrote it.
instruments.
Did you, Rinde, at what point were you asked to write the tale of the magician and the watchmaker, the clockmaker?
Well, when Paola talked to me about continuing, and she asked me what I thought of the direction, I said, well, I had reservations.
Had you seen the piece? You were in it.
I was
in it.
Yeah, I was in it. Yes, and she said, "Well, would you like to write it?" And I said, "Well, it means I'm going to really then take it in a different direction."
Which was really exciting.
Yeah. And she said, "That's fine with me." And she said, "If you find that we can use some of the music, it's great. The more we can use, the better."
Right.
And
had you written a fair amount?
I had written, not a fair amount, but about 10, 15 minutes. But what I really loved about the process with Rinde was that there were moments in which, I had old text, and he was like, don't rewrite it, let me write into it. Oh. And I had never had that kind of fluid process, which of course can only happen when someone's a composer. Right. Like Rinde, in that, he would go into the score, and I would send him my Sibelius, and I'd like get it back with,
So you'd look at the score itself.
With new words.
I would rewrite lyrics for music that already existed, which is something I've done with a number of different composers. Practically every composer I've worked with.
And actually the very ending of the piece was completely written without the words, which was kind of the coolest thing ever. I'd written this very contrapuntal ending that I wanted, and then he went in and completely wrote, and then of course we tweaked. But it was a very creative process, and also because we had these, these many years in between where we were at the, the Watermill Center, at the Park Avenue Armory, we had a lot of feedback. There was a lot of time to work on story, if you will, but it wasn't until Mass Mocha just last week where Julian really got to do, like he has much magic, but the magic in terms of actually staging the piece. So.
Did you say you had to use your lizard brain?
I did say that. I think, so what happened, we did 3 different tryouts since I was involved. He did one before me. But each time it was like, okay, we have 2 days.
Right.
And there's a lot of elements, with the choir and everything. So we just would have, I remember the first one, we would just have to put something together really quickly. But because people sort of liked most of that, next time we would keep that. But we never really had a rehearsal process, not that I would consider one. We just had texts. But really, the texts were kind of a writing. We were creating the material like on its feet.
And we didn't have the luxury either of being able to just do a workshop performance, because we were trying to interest people in getting on board. So they ended up all being like showcases, which is a very different thing than presenting, say, just a rehearsal process.
And getting feedback from
people.
So the lizard brain, literally last week I thought, I think we were lucky in a way, skill and luck, but in a way it wasn't really a totally workable schedule to get all these disparate elements up. So I found myself thinking, I have to not think too much, and I have to use my lizard brain to direct this, where you just go on gut instinct, make very fast decisions about video content and timings, what just suddenly needs tweaked in the show, you know, when kids should go up into this machine exercise, and so there was very little time. We did discuss that very briefly for about 5 minutes, but most things were not discussed. We just had to go in, do it, and we just came out the other end of that. So yesterday I had a day with Rinde when we know what the show is, so the show's written, we know what the video is, and actually, it was we had our first rehearsal, I would say, yesterday.
At the Walker.
How did you perform in front of an audience at Mass Mocha if your first rehearsal was yesterday?
But this is what I'm saying.
Well, we had been in our separate worlds. I was basically, you know, Julian was checking in with me on a regular basis, but I had to also work.
Right.
While he was working, trying to coordinate all this stuff.
Right.
I was just honing some kind of performance, which turned out to be close to the mark. So what we're doing, but we didn't have a kind of concerted rehearsal where Julian and I could just go back and forth, and he could say this, you know, if this, not that. If you go, don't go there. Let's pull back on this. What if you did this? Or I could then invent something. He'd say, oh, that's nice. Let's use that first, and then you can go into this. And what if you started that first? Yes, I like that thing. And so we kind of do that kind of.
You did that
hands-on.
Some of that
pretty much. I mean, you know, there were little snatches, but it was mostly a bit, you know. It was like me saying something in a hurry while something else was, you know, whilst...
Yeah,
you know, it was just like in tech rehearsing rather than... And, but, you know, the thing is, you know, that you are a very competent solo performer and it's your material.
Right.
And so, in a way, I mean, that wouldn't have worked if we couldn't trust Rinde to do that.
Yes, right,
But it's interesting, and I mean, I think it's an interesting piece because... And I've not seen something like it, and I've not done something like it. I've done things like all the different elements of it, but the combination of it is quite extraordinary because it is sort of a solo show, except there's over 30 people on that stage. There's a choir and a conductor and four string players, quartet.
Well, and the choir, the way the choir is treated, I've never seen anything like it in terms of what Julian's done with them, and I think that's, to me, one of you know, the most magical aspects of the show is how they relate to Rinde and what they do in terms of the staging. It's
but it's interesting because a lot of those decisions were actually about simplicity and having to just get it up. But often they're good decisions. So that's what I mean by the lizard brain, where something else takes over.
Do you find, though, your work maybe over many years as an improviser and a puppeteer in creating shows on the spot, you know, maybe
I think it's more the fact that I've been around a lot of devised shows.
Right.
And I think... you know, I've been in companies where people were very capable of generating work, but I think over the years I've developed like some skill in how to put devised work together into a structure that feels satisfying in a way. So I feel what I'm doing most of the time with this job is a structural job, and in some ways I feel I was thinking about today. You know, I think it's Rinde and Paola's baby, and I'm like the midwife in a way. And it's been a complicated birth, and I'm not saying that to be modest because I think sometimes I've saved the baby's life. You know, but I think that's sort of what it is in a way I'm looking at all these elements which, you know, the job chose me. I didn't choose the job, and I'm just trying to. I know that. Yeah, I think I have a good sense of how to structure a piece and how to keep a piece moving, and a good enough understanding of backstage problems and, you know, from making. So it's not so much about puppetry or it's more that it's just like I understand the jigsaw puzzle of new work. I think, and I think that's why I was the right person to do this, just because we did that with Shock at a Pizza. We never rehearsed that either. We put that on stage in 2 days and thought, oh my God, what have we done? But I'm interested in the decisions. Yeah, the lizard brain. I only invented this yesterday. So the lizard brain makes on the spot. When in a way you can't have an academic or intellectual or theoretical discussion. You just have to get the show on and you sort of go, oh, okay, these are better than the decisions that I would deliberate over. And there are definitely some things in the show that I think if we had a rehearsal process, we would have not done. And there's some things in here that I think, oh, could only have come out of that sort of slight chaos.
Yeah. Paola, you mentioned about the choir. Have you written for choral forces
yes,
much?
I love writing. My favorite thing is to write for the voice.
When I last saw the piece at the Armory, which I even then thought was beautiful, but the choir was quite. I still presumed that they were quite stationary throughout the show. Do you animate them at some point?
I'll let Julian answer that, but in terms of, vocally writing for them, what I liked about the Brooklyn Youth Chorus is that they were really excited to go on this journey, and they were really excited to work with Julian, fell in love with Rinde, so they were very open to trying new things, and then of course just, the thing about working with kids is that they memorize things, so they internalize music in such a way that when they perform it, you never kind of guess how it's going to come out. It's always the same, and it's always perfect.
Really?
So, I mean, that's the thing about working with these specific choirs. I shouldn't say
at all.
They've always memorized the music. They take the changes really well. They're
absolutely
they're
solid.
Extraordinary.
Is it unique to? I know the reputation of the Brooklyn Youth Chorus.
I think it's
really
unique
strong.
to there's very few choirs like them. Definitely, they're very, very special, and their leader Diane is very invested.
I would guess you worked closely with Diane on how to get what you needed out of the children's choir.
Yes, and we had many rehearsals with them outside of the process with Rinde and Julian, and then also just recently did a workshop with paper. Which was really fun. I'll let you talk about how...
Well, the choir thing is interesting for me. I mean, the interesting thing, and this I have to say out of the whole production is the new thing for me is to have I think in this we have 26 in this version of it. I think we've had more sometimes at the workshop.
Yeah, the workshops are 40.
But I have 26 kids on stage, and so I can actually explore sort of conducted imagery, which I've never done. I mean, I've done a lot of mass imagery, but actually to have someone who can make them all do something at the same time. Right? So I mean, I was looking for simple things that wouldn't mess up their singing, or simple gestures all the way through. And one of the hard things about the choir is in the middle of our chaos and our lack of rehearsals, they were supremely organized.
The kids are looking at the adults going, what's wrong with this?
So it was like, I was very aware of that when we were going, we should do this. No, let's do this. And it's like, they're going,
That's interesting, though, about a conductor, who I usually think of just serving a musical role. It sounds like Diane also served a theatrical, like she was conducting gestures, conducting a certain kind of visual.
And that was great. She was willing to do that, and it was exciting. I mean, she wants her choir to be stretched, and she wants to see them, do things beyond what they, people's expectations.
Yeah.
And in terms of what you were saying, I think in terms of what you saw at the Armory, this show, I would say the first half is pretty close to that. I think we've gone slightly more into Rinde's dialogue and find out what each section means and how to stage that.
Right.
And, put a little bit more colour into it. But I think it's the second half of the piece where
when he gets on the train.
Yeah, and the choir do move later. I mean, it starts pretty, conventionally staged, but by the end, those kids are in different places, and it feels to me that they kind of move at the right time for our piece.
And they activate the instrument.
So the second half, I think, is very transformed from those workshops.
Well, Rinde, I was going to ask about that journey. I mean, one interesting question, perhaps, is your character. The imagined character is heading toward his death. We're not sure about Harold. You're surrounded by kids, and you're juxtaposing youth and end of life. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's this tremendous gestalt of opposites, of kind of poetic opposites. You have a kind of burlesque that is the showman, the magician, and we've referenced one of the turn-of-the-century magicians called William Robinson. And Robinson actually pretended to be a Chinese magician and told people he couldn't speak English just so that he wouldn't have to talk, because he wasn't good at the patter. And so there's this...
Did he dress up as a Chinese guy?
Yes, he did. He dressed in this elaborate costume, shaved his head. He did the whole thing. His wife pretended to be Chinese. It was amazing, and he pulled this off. The audiences thought He called himself Chungling Su, which was actually borrowed from actual Chinese magician he had seen. Anyway, William Robinson figures in this as a kind of model for Harold's story that he's inventing. And so we have the juxtaposition of that kind of the intimacy of Harold's life and this imagined like magic show, which in his head is very large. And we also have we had the phone call. You remember the phone call in the middle?
Yeah.
And we have this thing which grounds us in a very concrete reality, which his sister calls. He has to deal with this, and it's very mundane. It's clear his sister is keeping track of him, making sure he's doing his work. It's very clear he's not doing his work.
Right.
And he's telling her he is. He's trying to mollify her in a certain way. There's also this idea that he's cared for. There's somebody who cares about him. He's not alone. He's not a typical isolato that's, he's got somebody who cares about him and who he cares about.
Although he's quite isolated.
Yeah, he is isolated, and he's got this imagination that has to be exercised.
Not in his imagination, yeah. And the kids play different roles too in that imagination.
They're both muse, they're both, kind of taking care of him, they're both challenging him. So it becomes this kind of artistic muse in a way of something that's both challenging you and making you young in a way.
Right.
So encouraging that youth in you.
And I should say that the kids have been with the piece, some of them since they were 11.
Wow.
So they've grown up with the piece, and it's been incredible. So we have a few people in the choir, a few young women in the choir, and one young boy who's been with the piece and have essentially grown up with Rinde and Julian and me. And it's been really nice to see that. And
they're fabulous. They're really.
So there's a real affection that's grown.
They're really sweet to me.
Yeah, and they've been witness to a process, which I think has been very special.
Do they function sort of like a Greek choir as well in the piece?
Yeah.
Greek chorus.
So it's poetically very rich and very complicated. And so the storyline, I think Harold is the nexus of this thing, but one has to trust the kind of poetic gestalt, really, and you have to trust, you have to submit in a way to its power, and you can't ever push it too far in one direction, otherwise it loses a certain kind of necessary ambiguity. We have to be unclear about a number of things in order for the whole to work in the way that it does and to have its effect on us.
That's right.
So there's an avoidance of kind of specific narrative.
Literal narrative.
Literal narrative where we say, he's dying, or this is Harold and this is the aging magician.
Right.
We don't know quite where Harold ends and where the aging magician begins. We don't know where life begins and where it ends.
Yeah.
So there's this wonderful sense of timelessness, and then time, of course, figures greatly in the thing.
Right.
So we hope that by the end, the audience is then that kind of timeless place where they don't know whether whether this is the beginning of something or the end of something.
And the costumes, I think Amy Rubin, who co-designed the set with Julian and who did the costumes, did a tremendous job painting painting these actual costumes of the kids where you don't know what time they're in, you don't know if they're alive or not alive, and it's just been beautiful.
They could be spirits.
They could be spirits.
Or,
I've loved seeing that come to life.
It's interesting the poetic nature of it, the sort of non-literal. You sound like you both taken chances collectively as collaborators, but also taken chances that an audience will go with you on that journey. And
that's what's been surprising to me is how readily they do. They don't have those kinds of questions. They're not unclear. They don't seem to ask, what's going on?
Yeah,
they don't ask that.
Is this Harold or is this the watcher?
They don't mind.
Because they're going on more of a spiritual, of a journey, like an emotional journey with it, and willing to buy into the poetics.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, I think they're asking it less. I think, the more it's staged, I think. I mean, I think, because I think there's certain, on some level, this does remind me of doing Satyagraha, where, Philip Glass had written something where everyone's singing Sanskrit.
Right.
We didn't want to surtitle everything because it would have just been repeated stuff. He was treating Gandhi's life, but he took it out of historical order. So in a way, there's nothing.
Right.
You know, it's hard to intellectually hang on to anything there. So doing that job, I know, was trying to find, well, how can you give this a rhythm through image that takes people along, even if they don't exactly understand every single beat of the words, if you see what I mean. And so I feel there's a certain element of that with this as well, is to take them on an emotional journey through. So if someone didn't understand English, they would still go on that emotional journey with the music and with the sounds and the
and certainly like
atmosphere
Glass
and
and
the
Wilson's
images.
Einstein on the Beach played in a similar kind of
you don't
way.
know what's going on exactly. And so it's, I mean, it's poetry rather than prose, you know, in that it's not a blockbuster narrative in that sense, you know. It's got a lot of, it's open to a lot of interpretation.
But the narratives too there are narratives within it that are clear.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a clear narrative of the aging magician himself, and it's stated enough times so that they understand what his concerns are.
Yeah.
They understand what Harold's concerns are. They understand him as a story in himself. And so I think because we keep coming back to narratives and the stories that they understand completely, they're fine with, I think, the larger chaos of that poetic world, because they can always ground themselves, and they can always say, well, you know, we know Harold. We know who that. We know who that. He's got, and we know, you know, this. He's got a sister who, and he betrays him. He betrays who he is by those phone calls. We added 2 more phone calls.
Oh, okay.
Because we thought this is a really useful thing for us.
So it's real life keeps injecting itself.
I think the confession act's a little bit like the
And
phone call as well. You know.
confession too.
You've got a series of, it seems like concentric circles in some ways with the work, in that you are all artists making a work, and you have Harold, who's doing a job which uses his hands, but he's creating an artistic work through the graphic novel, which is the aging magician is the lead character, and then you've got you know, audiences outside watching your art. You know, it's like art in some ways about art, but with a much bigger spiritual journey going on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's well
There's
said.
a great moment in the process that you mentioned at the talkback at Mass Mocha that I think you'll find funny, which is that we had gone through several revisions, and at one point, you know, it was very frustrating, I think, for Rinde, because he kept kind of finding these stalls.
Right.
And so we were reaching the last workshop at the Armory, and he's like, okay, let's meet at the Armory. And I was really excited because I was a few weeks out and I hadn't written anything yet, and I was waiting for text. And he arrived, and he had made the table where he was going to sit. And I was like, Rinde, this is great. Are there any words? And he was like, just wait. So he takes out this beautiful book, and it's filled with drawings. And I was like, are you joking? In my head, I was like, I'm going to kill him. I was like, Rinde, this is so great.
What the hell is
very
to do
sweet.
with this?
But what was wonderful was that it was actually a moment of life imitating the process of Harold, which was like he was not going to write these words for me. He was going to do what he wanted to do, which was, you know, actually make this magical book, which is now figured into the piece in a really, you know, profound way. And that's actually when we started. I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to write the music, and you're going to have to write into it.
Well,
not waiting anymore.
I had to at one point. In order to write, I need to know where especially for solo stuff, I need to know where my character is standing. I need to know where he is in the world and what he's looking at.
Right.
And for some reason, because I needed something to ground me theatrically, and I needed a table, and I knew Julie and his team were busy with another project, and I knew that they couldn't make it.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know, I've got skills in this way, so I will make myself a table.
Did you actually do the carpentry?
Yeah, I did the carpentry. I made the table, and it had to do certain things.
And the chair.
And I had to be able to stand on it. It had to be able to tour.
Right.
And I did the whole thing. I made a tourable, sturdy table, and you know, it works really well. And then once I'd made the table, I thought, but he's got to have a chair that matches the table, and so I made a chair that matched the table.
You were busy.
And it took me.
Is that all still here?
I was working 8 hours a day, you know, carpentry, making this thing, not doing the words. But once I had it, I felt like now I can.
Right.
Now I can. I felt really confident once I had that table.
Right.
I could sit there. I remember just sitting down in it in my basement once it was done and going, I can see this. And then, you know, the book, it was all like...
Well, the funny thing about the book was that you don't think you were there. The funny thing about the book yesterday, we were down there, because Rinde's always facing out, projections happening behind him because of the speed
that was
working.
funny, yeah.
He doesn't see what it is most of the time. He was sitting there saying, oh, I really like these drawings. And I said, they're your drawings from the book. And he went, oh, okay.
I knew there was a reason they looked really clever. Well, Rinde, you have a lot to carry on your shoulders in the show. I mean, in many ways, you're both characters. You're the principal singer. You're right front and center almost throughout the show. Is that, how do you, I mean, is that a lot of pressure, or are you able to?
It's a lot of pressure, but I've been there so often now.
Right.
I mean, I go back to the 80s with Slow Fire, where it was, you know, one of the first 2-act solo pieces, and then I've done a number since then, and so it's familiar ground for me.
Right.
And there's a kind of chutzpah at a certain point when you've done enough of them. You feel like that even if things, and Julian and I were talking about this the other day. And he was saying, you know, even if it goes completely, because we were doing a really raw thing at Mass Mocha, and he said, you know, even if it goes completely south, he said, you know, just make that part of the poetics of the show. And in fact, I had 2 moments where things did go south, and I had to.
You mean mid-performance? You were.
We had agreed that.
Just forgot where he was.
Words,
we would agreed that I would add a phone call. I would just pick up the phone. And then I would call. I would say, "Sis, you know, what's my line?" And then the stage manager would call out something, and it was kind of delightful. But the flow didn't stop. So I felt like we were once that was, if that actually was a good thing. It's just like
I think the heroic thing really does, though, because it's true. It's that it's you. You've got that responsibility of the solo show, but I imagine the perk of a solo show is you can sort of forget and meander or whatever.
Exactly.
But he has like a million music cues and choirs and video stuff.
Right.
So he doesn't really have the kind of the golden lining of a solo show.
Right.
And the luxury.
You can't really stretch out a section if you decide or add something.
There are bits actually, but it's hard at the moment.
And kids need cues.
Yeah.
If I don't come up with my cue,
They wait.
they wait.
But you know, if we, you know, we're still in very early days. If you toured the show and you did 10 performances, there are bits you could stretch out, but it's just hard at the moment for you to even know what cues of yours and what aren't. In a way, you know. But we would get, you know. It would find where it could get a little baggy and where it needed to be really tight.
Paola, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about this as an evening-length composition, or do you see it as a series of, you know, there's songs built within it, or the musical architecture that you worked with?
That's a great question. I mean, I definitely see it as a suite of pieces, a suite of songs, and I've been thinking a lot, if we recorded this as an album, you know, what it would be like, how it would work as a composition. There are generally thematic things that return during the piece and motives that return, so in that way it exists as an opera, if you will.
Right.
But then it's divided by these poetic interludes that are spoken and underscored. So then it becomes a little bit more theatrical. And then there's a suite of songs which are on the F train, which are really these operatic songs.
Right.
So it kind of exists in a hybrid way. I think if I were to do an album of it, we'd probably do a little bit more tweaking, improvising, which I love. I love Rinde's improvising, so we would probably work on that a bit more. But it does exist in this hybrid way of opera and music theater in the underscores, and then of course the motivic elements are operatic as well.
Right. You must have a unique ability to not be. Don't take this the wrong way. I mean, I'm not commenting on classical composition in general, but not be too precious about the structure of, I mean, the way you had conceived the score. You had to kind of have a certain amount of flexibility to be able to shape it with your collaborators.
Well, I mean, I think I'm in a very, very special position to collaborate with these three wonderful artists, and so I think, you know, the whole reason you do multimedia is to learn from other people. Otherwise, you just, you know, you do your own thing, and I could definitely write my own compositions and not ask anybody. But that's not the point of this. The point of this for me is is a whole new world, is to grow, and is that I will bring this experience with me into the next experience, and I'll have, you know, watching Julian, he is very instinctual, and that's, you know, like a master improviser with all this incredible technique, and and Rinde has that same power, and then Mark Stewart has whim and magic, and you know, so it's I think when you choose, when you're lucky to choose who you work with, then you have to be open and you have to be malleable. So
and
I hope I brought that to the process.
Well, and your process of the making of the piece, I'm not sure I've ever, I'm sure it happens sometimes, but the choice of collaborators first, and then the idea
I always work that
we're going
way.
to construct something
I
together.
work by muse,
really?
absolutely.
And
I can't write unless I know who I'm writing for. I mean, that's why I started my own company when I was 19, you know, because I kind of needed my own path.
So you had that level of confidence that if you could get these guys all together, all your collaborators, that you would generate something pretty special in terms of what the content ultimately would be.
Definitely. I mean, I you know, I felt that if I could convince Rinde to write it, and I could convince Julian to direct it, and I could convince Mark to work with us, that we would create magic, and I think we have. I mean,
Paola's very persuasive.
I'm very persistent. But also, I think, you know, when you look at the process, you know, nobody thinks about how long something is going to take flight.
Sure.
So it's not like we started this thinking, oh, we're going to spend 5 years making this.
No,
The reality of when you're producing your own work and trying to find people to buy into an idea is that it takes time. And so, I mean, time is your best friend in that sense. You don't push the process, you go with it. You try to keep people engaged, and, you know, because all of us are very busy with many other things.
Sure.
So there have been moments in the process that have been heartbreaking. I wish it could have gone faster. You know, I think it could have gone faster.
Right.
But then, you know, that's life.
Yeah.
You know, the opportunities come when they come.
I'm guessing the scheduling and calendaring of the
process
was one of the most complex
Yeah.
things of figuring out how you could all be in the same place at certain times. And
Definitely.
things.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
I
were
mean,
there
what
ever
else?
moments when you thought, all right, this was a good process up to now, but we all have to move on and let this
I think
work go?
probably
Every couple of weeks.
every couple of weeks. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then last week I was really happy. I thought, oh, this is really good. But I mean, and there were some things, you know, in a way, like Josh Higginson, who's the video designer.
Yeah.
And I persuaded him to the lighting design as well. But I mean, partly because in that arm room there weren't many lights, but he stayed in there with it. I mean, he actually kind of came to us through a scheduling problem.
Yeah.
You know, and and you know,
That's
sometimes
amazing.
those things, they just kind of work out one way or another. I mean, as I say, I
think it was
we've
probably
been fortunate. You know,
and probably the hardest for Julian, because I mean, we had music rehearsals and text rehearsals, and he was obviously huge, you know, collaborating every step of the way. But we really didn't have a chance to do what we're doing now until last
into
week.
theaters and really
I think
Yeah.
it has been tough to get, because if I think about it, you know, I think we had 2 days at here, probably 3 days at the Armory, another 3 days at the Armory, and then last week. I mean, if I look at it, it's I've only been working on it 2 to 3 weeks over 5 years,
Right.
and just, you know, waiting for that material, and then under an extreme public
Right.
pressure, in a way,
Sure.
very
Right.
big pressure to create with a lot of people in the room, some of whom are much better prepared than I am, you know, because you know, and then so that element of it. But then, of course, I've not done what you've done, which is a kind, you know, the writing and the process, and then sometimes it's been cut and changed. And
But there's another element to this, to the business of hanging out with something for a long time, and I think all of us as artists understand that it's not all about what's consciously going on.
Right.
It's not necessarily the number of hours you spend writing,
Right.
or even thinking about it. It's your life experiences going on, and especially with something that has these kinds of deep, these poetic, this deep poetic meaning and elements. You know, these are very deep elements. We're talking about time and death and youth and imagination. These are big, and they work on artists in a very particular way underneath all this. So regardless of what is consciously going on, you have in the back of your mind that there is this piece somewhere, and it's working its way, doing its magic, so that when you do finally get that opportunity, you have a lot more to bring to that situation than you may have been consciously aware of. And so
you're
suddenly
sleeping with it.
You're sleeping with it. You've been living with it for a number of years, and it does things to you. It has it does things to you, and if it doesn't, I think you tend to know that and then abandon it.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons why we kept at this was because each one of us thought, it's still going on. I'm still not able to lose this.
Yeah.
There's something happening in me when I think about this. You know, the elements of it, there's something about this that's right. And you keep on going back and saying, you change this, but even when I had a moment when I brought everybody a new script. We had this meeting in New York, and I came in with the whole thing.
I was in Switzerland on Skype. I remember.
Yeah, and everybody was on Skype, and I read this thing, and there was this kind of awful silence. And there was this, and everybody was being very kind, but it was clear that nobody was happy with what I had done. And it took, and that night was it was a bad night. When I went home and I just thought, normally when that happens, I don't rush to any judgments about anything, but I thought, if I can't come up with anything, then I gotta stop, because it's not. And then I that next day, I put this blank page in front of me. Actually, I put this big book in front of me. It was a big sketchbook. I sat down, and normally when I've gotten stuck, that's what I do. I put some piece of paper in front of me, the blank page. I'm actually doing a TED Talk in April on the blank page and its power. And I put the blank page in front of me. I said, "It's time. I have to start again. Let's see where we are." And of course, when you've done 1,000 pages, it's not a blank page.
Right.
And so I went into that, and
But you let go of everything.
I let go of everything, and then all the things that needed to express themselves kept coming back, and so very quickly, the new scenario came up, and then my presentation to them, it was very critical, and I presented the new idea, and it was such a different tenor in the room. It was clear. Everybody, you could start to see it. Everybody could see it. They could go, okay, this now we can get behind.
And then that draft was also an absolute reaction to that, wasn't it? That's really where the element of you're struggling with the writing that is really in the middle. I mean,
so that struggle became a central issue in the piece.
Yeah. Right, sure. So you drew from what you knew.
I drew from what was actually going on in the process.
Yeah.
And that's always a very strong place to be, what's actually there. I think with Julian, with material, Julian can take a piece of paper, just an ordinary piece of paper, and he looks at it in a very different way. And suddenly, it's taking on life that you had no idea.
Anyone can do that. He can do it. We did it yesterday, and he did it great.
I think all the way back to
I wouldn't have known to do it without Julian saying, it's you don't have to
be alive.
It's so simple.
Yeah.
Watch.
Yeah. Could you talk about that? Yeah, I think I read a quote from a local article just the other day about your relationship to, say, paper and life, animating these objects, and you said something to the effect of that you can instill bring something to life that is an inanimate.
Yeah, we can bring anything to life. I mean, it was. I think I haven't seen that interview.
It's quite good.
I forgot about it. I should have a little look at it. But I was sort of saying that human beings have this capability, and in a lot of religions, are about the worship of an inanimate object, objects coming in, and that's right.
Right.
And so really, it's actually a really simple trick, really. If a performer believes something, we're going to go with them. If they don't, we won't go with them.
Right.
They're pretending. They're pretending to believe, we won't believe them. But if you actually, and it's just the same as acting, really. I mean, they make the leap. You go with it. I mean, I suppose I just got interested in it. I was a maker, so in some ways my big flashy skill was the fact that I could sculpt something and people would be impressed with it on the workshop table.
Right.
But I think over the years, I would realize that the best things in the show were not necessarily things that I'd sculpted the best. They were often rougher things or things found off the streets, and then you start realizing there's like a power in seeing for people to see ordinary materials from their everyday life manipulated, and so. You know, with the newspaper thing, that was part of Improbable's work.
It was the first work 70 Hill Lane.
I remember we created before that in a workshop for a thing called The Mason's Child, and you know, and then developed a series of exercises around it and used it. And I still use it. I'm sure Phelan and Lee still use it. You know, use it to train an ensemble, even if there's no newspaper in the show or nothing. It was a great way of finding a common language, and so.
And how are newspapers used in this work?
Well, we don't use newspaper. We do use sheets of paper. I mean, partly because we
use newsprint.
It seemed right to use projections, and in a way that I did take a little bit from it in Satyagraha, where people can pick up paper,
right,
and you can project on it, which means now with this group of kids we can put a projection on the screen wherever like, because they can be conducted to lift it. So
right, sure.
So there's on that element, and to be honest, in the workshops, because we never had any time, I couldn't really take that any further. But we used it as a shadow screens as well, in the same kind of way, with one kid with a flashlight and a little bird in the hand, and the other one with a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
So we'd done that before, and I had always wanted to do, for them to create a figure. I always thought it was going to be the mother, but now I think it's the boy.
It's the boy. Yeah.
But I'd always wanted to do that, and we found a place for that there. I had always wanted them to, because I wanted to kind of break the preciousness maybe, or I'd always wanted them to screw up their paper and throw it at Rinde's head at some point. We put that in. So bit by bit we just expanded that. I mean, actually none of it is that difficult or clever. But it's the way where you place it, I suppose, and how you get them to do it, and then of course because they're doing that, then I wanted Rinde to do a bit of that, because it felt like it should come from him,
right,
before going to the chorus. So I mean, in a way that I feel like that's how you build a show, just really not with anything particularly clever, just a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it spreads and starts infecting the whole thing. And I think it's similar with Mark and the instrument. It's not one of it is not one bit of it is like really, really hard. It's just a lot of simple things that start being accumulated. And I think for me, since with a blank sheet of paper or whatever, I know that when I work, that what I usually look for is a material. I look for something. I'm not looking for lots of ideas. I'm just looking for one idea that can be pushed obsessively, generally.
Right.
And I guess, she usually ends up with about 3. We probably have about 3 ideas that we're pushing.
But in your role, you guys seem to be working so collaboratively, such a tight team and things. But I would guess now, because the final stages have been quite condensed, Julian, your role as director, did you find it at times difficult, awkward? Everyone's married to certain aspects that they brought in, and ultimately, if you're directing the piece, you have to decide what stays in, what doesn't, or how.
I didn't find the collaboration hard, and I don't feel that we've had a lot of collaborative
difficulties.
differences.
We
actually, in some ways,
other.
Mark gave me a slightly harder time last week, because he's made, with us, but he's made this extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
And I have to judge how long.
Timing.
How long do we see that thing for, and when do I think it's best to leave them wanting more?
Sure. Right.
And he was a little desperate to see more of it. So
right.
I had the nearest to
a
creative thing than that. The hard thing has been schedule and organisation, and this is not a normal piece of theatre.
Yeah.
So for the production team, there's not an ordinary way of doing the show.
No,
we come from different places, different conventions.
And we're dealing with kids' schedules.
Yes.
And kids' needs, which are very real.
Yeah. Well, and even, normally we'd want to run the show for 3 or 4 performances, but we needed to work, within, the kids only can get a day off from school, so make a Saturday and a Sunday matinee, and,
if there was conflict, it was usually around scheduling or priority, because actually, I was in a position, I think, where everyone wanted time, and I had to be in charge and say, no, that's the end of that time, that's the end of that time.
Right, we have to keep moving forward.
We can't have a second dress rehearsal or whatever. So it was around that. I don't think creatively, I can't recall.
No, the
conflict,
creative process was lovely.
But I'm curious about this process that, I think all of you come out of essentially a sort of outsider realm of producing new performance and new opera and new theater. in the stricter world of, say, a opera company or a theater company, a regional company or a Broadway show, where there might be all the resources to really, everyone devotes their 8-10 weeks or whatever, and it just moves on. You know, are there benefits to this? I mean, you've had to wait for co-commissioners to come in and for the resources to be found, and Beth's done, you know, yeoman's work around pulling pieces together, both of you guys. What are the pros and cons of, like, essentially this is like a devised theatrical process in a certain way?
You know, I think, you know, it just is what it is. I mean, I actually suspect if this had been more conventional and it was like you're going to write something and then there's going to be like a 5-week rehearsal period, I might not have done it.
Right.
The fact that it was like a small commitment in these kind of separated things.
There's also no guarantee, as we can tell from the amount of awful shows that
big producing organizations.
that big producing organizations end up doing, and they have enormously long and complicated rehearsal processes and development processes, and then you look at the result and you go, that's what you came up with.
Yeah.
You devoted your budget was $2 million, and you came up with that. And you know, and Bird Heart was like,
so
you know, a budget of $50.
Oh, not that much.
and they came up with something extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you know, so it's like. So, you know...
But that had a similar process to this on Little Dribs and Rabs. You saw at some point.
Yes, yeah.
It's gone somewhere from there, but it's
beautiful.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, that having now probably more than the rest of you, I do those
Broadway,
those things. I do the Broadway stuff. I do, you know,
the Metropolitan Opera.
And actually, I would say it's not so true. The Met are pretty cool, actually. But the Broadway shows, they raise their stakes so much, and there's so much money, and there's living people and their money, is that fear actually becomes
the dominant.
The fear is at the rudder of that particular boat, and so and that's the killer, I think.
Yeah, I would say with these kinds of productions, art remains the main focus and choice.
We take little bites at it with this.
Well, how can I possibly explain a poetic gestalt that can't be seen until all the elements are in place?
Yeah, right.
How can I convince someone of that? It has to be. I mean, the three of us know and have done this before. We've been in chaos before and understood that it can take us to some place extraordinary. Right. But trying to convince someone who's not been in that process, who doesn't trust that process, you know, how do you do that? That's really tough.
It's not an easy elevator speech to pitch.
This is not a conversation we've had, but in a way now this thing exists. I mean, I could imagine how you might grow this into something more like an opera, or I could imagine how you might grow it into more like a theatre piece. It'd be slightly different routes or whatever.
What do you think it is right now?
I mean, I think it's gloriously unique, and I'm very pleased
oratorio,
about that.
song cycle, opera. They don't. None of the labels quite fit.
Not music theater.
That's what I love about it, is the fact that this is really special.
It's a combination of 4 voices.
And we can. I think we all. I think at Mass Mocha we finally felt we could all kind of relax. And that's why yesterday was so relaxed, was because we all felt confident that this is a really unique experience.
Well, usually I can tell the tenor of a room as soon as we have a lot of works that are finishing their development or things, and I've been impressed how easygoing, and the tenor seems very comfortable.
Yeah. Now we can worry about
the fact that you're all right here.
We got all that stuff out last week because it was just intense.
Oh my God!
It goes up a notch when the choir arrives.
It does.
Right. Yeah. I'll stay out of it.
Yeah. Although here we only have one choir. Last in Mass Mocha we had 2 choirs.
Yeah, we had 2
because they're alternating back. Right.
I mean, that was crazy.
Yeah. Paola, could I just ask you a bit more about this stylistically? How you approached the writing of this work musically. I know you have used a fair amount of electronics in recent compositions. But here you're using strictly acoustic instruments, acoustic voice, and like the quality of the score at times is so. I mean, it reminds me of some of my favorite composers at times. It has this this emotional undercore that is really moving and has but is also kind of draws from a simplicity or a kind of spareness. I think of Arvo Pärt or Goretzky or other moments, and I wondered, did you draw from certain approaches compositionally to get to a certain emotional tenor in the work?
So I mean, it really started with Rinde's voice and his range. So that was the first thing that I thought of when writing, was that he had this incredible ability to go high, and yet is also such a beautiful baritone. So starting really with the instrument at hand and the person.
That remarkable range.
That remarkable range is the very first thing. Then you take into account the ability to improvise, which is such an incredible skill for someone who can read music that's quite complex and then be able to bring a level of improvisation to it is kind of the best of both worlds.
Vocally?
Vocally, absolutely, vocally, and then of course, even in the process of being able to go back and forth and have actually a very deep dialogue with someone about counterpoint, about rhythm, an understanding of the locution of words, and have him be able to write into that. And then definitely the fact that I did not want to use electronics in this piece because it felt very, very natural and very organic, and so it would feel wrong to bring in anything electronic in it. So then I got to...
It has like a timeless quality that I think electronics would have interfered
It would have interfered. I mean, we even talked about it with sound effects, like, no, we can't do that. So the organic nature of having the very, the kind of most primal, beautiful organism, which is a string quartet, accompany this, beautiful man in his range.
So writing for a quartet forces was early on.
Yeah, that was always there. And then of course having this choir of voices. I love writing for choir.
Right.
It took on almost the form of a requiem.
Yes.
And then Rinde's range. And so I got in a way the best of both worlds, in that I was able to to really think about the quartet and the voices, and these there are these minimalist strains, but then also to be able to really dive into arias that are complex and that have serious counterpoint, serious rhythmic rhythmic difficulty, and to be able to have that diversity in the piece, I think hopefully mirrors the scope of complexity in this character. That at moments he imagines himself to be this incredible opera singer, or not even imagines, but he is. The complexity of emotion that he's talking about when he says, "I'm a core of rock and ice. I'm like Neptune." That has to be complex. It can't be a fun. But when he's talking about a magician, then it's a Broadway tune. For me, stylistically, I feel very confident in that I have one voice, so I don't mind appropriating and taking certain things, because at the end of the day, it's me.
Yeah, and it's what you brought, what you felt the story needed. And,
definitely.
Rinde, did you have? How did you find? You write. Obviously you're a composer. You sing both classical works and mostly very contemporary work. But how did you find the score as it was coming in, and as you? Or did you said you were kind of starting with the score at times and writing text to it?
Paola writes so well for the voice. I didn't really have much to say except praise mostly. They're extremely singable lines and lovely phrases to sing. So it was no-brainer on that one. It was really easy. And again, she was writing form, and we could talk about these things too. We could talk about which octave should this be in? Should this be in the lower octave? That was the toughest part for me. Is like finally negotiating and remembering what octave I was actually singing in, whether it was supposed to be up high, or whether we're going to do this an octave down, or then we're going to jump up here, or we could do half of it in that octave and then do that other half in this octave. So we had some negotiations as far as that goes. Then occasionally there were moments when I could just expand, and she would just be able to say, just expand this a little with an improvisational thing, and then we'd come back to the score here. And it was all very easy, it seemed to me. Because that's not true of so many people, but Paola writes really well for the voice, so that was not a hard thing.
Fantastic. And I think it was, you were quoted recently about this notion of a requiem sung by kids, that again, that juxtaposition of young people dealing with death in some ways, musically. Is there anything else any of you would like to say?
Then I was musing, listening to them in a way and thinking about the kids. What I like about the piece, having done a lot of opera and doing some contemporary opera and some old opera and a lot of theatre music, so things like a lot of kind of things that just sit in the middle of theatre and music. You know, I like it as a piece because I think what I like about it very much is that it feels, and I think it's sort of to do with the kids' presence maybe. It allows us to be more accessible and not get caught up with whether something is cool or, and so there's an accessibility I think in the writing that is. It's rare now in contemporary work because I think people get ashamed of being accessible. And, you know, this happens. I think it happens in the art world as well. You know, there's it's interesting. It's interesting for people to know when to be populist and when that's strength or when that's weakness or whatever.
Yeah.
I think I'm not expressing it very well actually what I mean, but there's something about having the kids and their presence there that I think makes it easier for us all to be simpler and accessible, which also helps the more difficult, inaccessible. But you know, so somehow there's something about this piece that I like very much. I feel like I'm not really expressing it, but there's something in this piece that the presence of the children brings.
Right.
That allows, I think, all of us as artists to kind of work with a lot of contrast, you know, to deal with accessibility and with some quite deep concepts
philosophical.
At the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Is that because the kids, did you want to make sure they understood and felt comfortable with the nature of the work?
I don't know. I was thinking then, because I was actually asking myself, I think it's maybe not so much about us. I think it's maybe how an audience perceives children on a stage. And so, and actually I think there's more generosity in the room, even in the audience.
That's interesting.
And less of a kind of art, like Nazi art.
Less charges of potential pretension.
Yeah, and
because
so I think it has a lot of joy in it, and a lot of
there is a lot of
openness,
joy,
even though it is dealing with death and serious issues. But I feel there's a kind of joy around it, and a joy in the way that people watch it, which is definitely something to do with the kids.
And it's been one of the interesting challenges around how best to frame it for a public, because
is it for kids? Is it for adults?
Yeah, I mean, we don't. We kind of walked a line. We don't do a lot for, you know, aimed specifically at kids, but we also weren't totally sure, like, is it for the, I mean, how would kids, 10-year-olds say, you know, deal with it?
So I have a 7-year-old and
came
came with a bunch of friends his age. I would say probably 7 up is, you know, is an age that,
I should have talked to you a few months ago.
Because when he was 4, he was like, I don't understand what's going on. This is boring.
Right. Yeah,
you know, and at 7, he was like, oh, you know.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Get it on a totally different level, but you know.
I'd probably put it slightly higher, just knowing that people bring slightly younger kids, no matter what the age.
They do,
yeah.
right.
So maybe 10.
I would have thought I would have actually, I think so. You know, I think somewhere around there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting because I have trouble with Bernhardt because some people want to sell us a kids show, and I say I don't say it's a kids show. You know, actually, and the truth is that I don't think I've ever done a piece that I see as exclusively adult or exclusively kids. I mean, they just do work. And kids are just like little adults. And if something's good, they'll stay with it. And if something's boring, they'll tell you very physically that they're bored. And the adults will be bored as well. They just won't show it.
They won't say it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So I never feel there's any difference.
Is there a hope for the work going forward? You may not want to delve into this, but you know, we have these performances here. You were just at Mass MoCA finishing the piece. It will go down to the Krannert Center. Is there hope that it will have a future life?
There's 3 more performances after that.
Oh, great.
So, and I mean, I think there's a hope for the piece. I'm not sure that the 3 of us have discussed it yet. But just because, you know, we've been so wrapped up in making it, having it come to life.
Right.
But I think, it feels really good.
Yeah. Well, it's such a pleasure to have you all here and to be able to host this work and premiere it tomorrow.
Well, the Walker's been instrumental in this whole process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure and honor. So we'll all be looking forward to Saturday night.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.